Utility rebates have been around. That is data center airflow management utility rebates have been around for about 10 years now. So that begs the question, you might be sitting there saying, to what extent is this relevant? We're having a discussion about utility rebates on a program that's already 10 years old. And I'd like to answer that question by referring you to a Wendy's hamburger commercial. How many of you guys remember the little old lady that exclaimed, "Where's the beef?" Now, it really hands, because it's going to be a generational thing. I can tell, see most of us. For those of you that don't remember that, there was a little old lady that Wendy's had, and she'd go into the restaurant, she'd order her hamburger, she'd open the bun up, and she'd go, "Where's the beef?" There's a small little patty. So Wendy's is basically saying, if you buy our hamburgers, you get a lot of beef, but if you go to the other places, you don't get the beef. Well, that's exactly what utility companies have been doing for many, many years. I'll give you an example. Part of airflow management, a really great fundamental part of airflow management, is cable cutout covers. And so a company would go out there, they spend their money on cable cutout covers, very important, eliminates all that bypass air and everything else. They go to the utility company and say, "Hey, we're ready for our rebate." And the utility company would say, "Where's the beef? Where's the energy savings?" I mean, you should have month one before your airflow management. That's what my cost of cooling is. And then you got the next month, and there should be a substantial difference between the two. So you can see how irritating that might have been for them when they spent money on a very important part of airflow management. I'll give you another example. Blanking panels. Same thing. Important about keeping the migration of hot air within the cabinet, right? You spend your $30,000, you get all of those blanking panels in, you go to the utility rebate, or the utility company go, "I want my rebate," and they say, "Where's the beef? Where is the energy savings?" So what has happened is there has been a significant change in the way we're getting utility rebates. And I wanted to kind of get this out of the way before we talk about the nuts and bolts. Those two things that have changed is technology, and the second part is utility companies have actually gotten a lot better about giving money away. Well, let's start with technology. What new technology has changed the game, so to speak, as it relates to utility rebates? Now, what I'd like to say, because my company works with containment, I like to say containment. But the problem with containment, if that's the answer, is containment is like sunscreen. It only benefits what you cover. So if you have just a little bit of sunscreen and you put that sunscreen on your nose, you go out in the sun, your nose is going to thank you. The rest of your body might not be too happy about that. So what happens is the same "where's the beef" is happening with containment, where a company goes in and they do containment within their data center. They do one pod, typically a high density pod, right? They go back for that utility rebate and the company goes, "Where's the beef? Where is the energy savings?" So the correct answer is not containment. The correct answer is when a data center is able to fully separate supply and return air, that's when the magic happens. That's where the rebates are happening. I'll give you an example. And this is a very recent example of one of the largest building, local neighborhood building supply companies. I guess I can't say the name, but there might be a color orange involved and they might be on every city block. They did what you probably have done. They've done the cable cutout covers, they've done the blanking panels, they couldn't find the energy rebate. Full containment was taken place so that there was a full separation of supply and return. And this is an actual letter I got last week from their consultant. They were able to drop their chiller supply temperature, increase their chiller supply temperature 14 degrees. They're talking about saving $20,000 to $30,000 a month in utility. Now you can imagine the utility company going, I see the beef there. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about what it means to get that rebate. And we're actually a little bit, you only have me, unfortunately. My partner in crime, Francis, is actually the manager of National Grid's utility rebate program. And Francis' father became very, very ill, and so he was not able to make it. So you'll have to kind of deal with me on his slides. These are his words, they're not my words, it's not my company's words, what Francis wrote. So I'm going to review that with you. And then we're actually going to go and look at a specific data center, especially as it relates to doing some pre-measurements, post-measurements, and how that allows us to get a utility rebate. Believe it or not, I just noticed in the audience, the guy that actually was the manager of that facility, I didn't even know he was going to make it. I ended up walking in the door, so nice to see you, but I might call on you if you don't mind as we go by. By the way, this is really an open discussion, and I would very much like for you to feel comfortable to say, hey, I got a question, unless it's about hamburgers, and I really can't help you on that. Okay. So what we're going to do today, I've already preempted this slide. We're going to talk about a California data center that got a large rebate from PG&E. By the way, bravo to PG&E. These guys have been doing it longer than most of the utility companies. And I'm not sure you know, it is mandated by the Department of Energy for these guys to set aside money. Every single dollar that comes in, a small portion actually goes into this fund. And so it's somewhat frustrating that they're not able to actually give this money away. Let's see if we can change that. So why do utility companies offer rebates? Well, they have to actually meet certain goals by the Department of Energy and reduction of power that's being used. If you can imagine these huge power plants that they don't want to have to go out there and repeat and buy lowering their capacity of electrical use. So they are very interested in your lowering the cost of energy at your data center, and that's their purpose. Good question. Who offers rebates? So far in my travels, which are rather extensive throughout the United States, I don't know of anybody that does not. I will say, though, that the programs are different. I will also say that because of certain areas where the cost of power is 4 cents a kilowatt hour versus another area where it's 11 or 12 cents, that might have some of the factors on that. But for a fact, nearly everybody is involved in doing that. So really, this is the fundamental question, and by the way, this is just brick and mortar. I mean, hello, how do they figure out the rebate? They basically try to analyze what the energy is that you're currently using and what the energy is after you've done some airflow management. And whatever that kilowatt hour saved becomes the mathematical way that they determine that they're going to give that rebate. But there are some very important factors we have to discuss as it relates to how do you safely increase temperature, reduce relative humidity, and or change the volume of air. In fact, that was part of something I wanted to share initially. I didn't see it in my notes. The only way to save energy is you have to change something. So you can put in all the airflow management you want. You can have a nice cold data center if that's what you want. But if you can't change a set point temperature, if you can't change a set point in relative humidity, or you can't change the volume of air that's required to cool that thermal load, where is the beef? Where is the energy saved? So something has to change in that. So we're going to just pretend Francis is with us, and we're going to go through some of his slides. So are all utility incentive programs the same? No, they're not. And that's just because certain locales have certain things that is more important for them to deal with. So incentive ranges can be huge. Francis, as an example, had one data center, their rebate was over $1 million. And then I've dealt with companies that are getting $20,000 rebates, and pretty much all in the middle there as well. You have a difference in a rebate program when you're dealing with a new construction site and with a site that already exists. And the new construction sites, I mean, that is a very positive place to get the utility companies involved soon, because you might say, there are certain things I'm going to do in the design of that data center that I'm going to change based on what kind of rebate I'm going to get from that company. So that's an important thing to do. One of the points here is a large number of utility companies do not have as much experience with data center efficiency. So remember I said that the program's nearly 10 years old? But the fact is it just took a long time for companies. Really, it's only been in the last few years we're starting to see a lot of rebates. So there can be a level, depending on where you're at, of inexperience, but not desire. So when you walk in and talk to the utility companies, they have a desire to give you this money. If you're walking in thinking, gosh, hey, is it okay with you? Maybe, would you help me out here? They want to give you the money. They have it in a bank. It's literally been earmarked for this. So when you walk in and say, I'd like to help you get that out of the bank, that's a positive thing for them. They want that. Now, if they have inexperience, then we're going to talk a little bit about where can you find that experiences to help them in getting that rebate. These are Francis' words, so I got to read them here. Okay, rule and incentive different from cost. Yeah, pretty logical. State-regulated programs is an example that would have a difference. Now, there are various areas that you can make an application. Most focus on the HVAC and airflow management. I will say these are what you would call the low-lying fruit. These are the easy ones because typically the inefficiencies, as an example in airflow management, exceeds 30%. So when you have that kind of an inefficiency, it's a very inexpensive fix, it's very easy to measure the differences, and so that's a typical area where they're at. Then you have other programs that go far into the virtualization issues and dealing with specific computer hardware issues, and some work with UPS systems as well. This speech has more to do with airflow management because that's the expertise I bring to the table, but understand that you could approach your utility companies and discuss these other items. So what is a typical matrix utility incentives from? That just doesn't sound right. What does a typical matrix utilities incentives come from? That seems like a typo there. So most are based on measured savings. So the fact is that, again, the math is very simple. You have to have what we call a baseline. The baseline says that's how much I'm currently using. And then you have to have a post where you're able to read it. Now, there is one issue that you need to be aware of, and that is what I commonly call the creeping KW. So during a program, let's say it takes 3 months for you to analyze post and pre and post measurements. But during that period of time, you've actually increased usage, power in the data center by new equipment that's coming in. You're pulling one server out that's using 400 watts and you're putting one in that's 900 watts. So it's a little tricky too as they're trying to analyze a moving target. But what we found is the target is not moving so vastly that you can't analyze what those savings are. Example, National Grid pays up to half the cost of an efficiency measure. That's pretty amazing. It's a great program they have there. And there's the National Grid Group, as with other utility companies I've dealt with, will provide the service absolutely for free. So when we had our situation with PG&E, it didn't cost a dime. PG&E, 3 guys I think came in. And were very, very helpful in helping the client know how to get those utility rebates, et cetera. Very, very helpful. And as Francis said here, he had one customer with over $1 million in incentives. Rather nice. This is a good question. So you might say, all right, I'm going to go through the effort of getting a utility rebate. But man, I do not want to walk in the door and spend a lot of time and find out that there's nothing there. So I liked what his comment here is most customers in typically an existing data center, a legacy data center, are in a position of having huge efficiency changes. So it is very rare for a utility company to go through the process and typically, like that pre-meeting that they might have with you, identify that, yeah, based on your set points and your temperature and relative humidity, based on the fact that you have no separation of air, that you're going to see a real large rebate. So it's nice to know that it's rare for them not to be able to help you out on that. And so here's the real big question: who's doing this? Our experience is very few companies are doing it, but I will say it is ramping up. So we're starting to see more. I met with NYSERDA, for instance, in the New York market, New York, New Jersey market, and they had a treasure trove of, I think, like $700 million that they have to give away. And they're upset that they've got $700 million to give away. They'd like to give it all away. But the fact is that they're seeing more and more companies come to this. And we think this is a wave that really needs to get going. But as I stated in the very beginning, unless you understand the fundamentals of pure supply and return separation, you're not going to see as much of these utility rebates. So there is a little bit of homework that you've got to do in order to get that full rebate from them. So it's really knowledge. It's really understanding how these rebates work as it relates to what airflow management delivers, what kind of results. I'd like to get on my soapbox for just 1 minute here. It always frustrates me when a manager, and properly so, he's trying to save money for his company, will haggle over a couple $100 between what I would call a very inferior type of containment situation versus a really nice one. And yet there's $50,000 just down the street, $50,000. So we're haggling over $200 on a door that's going to last forever in their data center, and they're not taking the time to go get the $50,000, which would easily pay for a really good containment system and some money left over. Off my soapbox. Okay, so an example, we have projects where our incentives afforded our customers to replace a cracked cooling system that wasn't keeping up with the cooling load. So in this case, he's dealing with older equipment that needs to be updated, right? No doubt having variable speed fans, you know, in the unit as well. New chillers, in-row cooling, and containment. It's a $1.2 million project. They paid half the cost. And of course, then you, the owner of the data center, benefits day after day after day, whatever those utility savings are. So remember, they're not giving the money away just to give the money away. The fact is they're trying to do this in such a way that they can save power from that point forward. And again, low-lying fruit, easy to do. All right, let's talk about a case study in California where PG&E was involved. And does anybody know what the DCEP trained experts are? People that go through programs that the DOE has put on, and these guys are really focused. They go through, what is it, Joe, 2 weeks? 2 weeks of training, or? Okay. But the higher track is a couple weeks of training and a lot of education. These guys really know what it takes to make the airflow management work. And so by taking the experts at PG&E, taking the DCE people, and working together well in advance of the project, it really went very smooth. The company is VirtuStream, and VirtuStream has a pretty good lock on technology. It's just pretty awesome work they're doing. They're also a very, how would you say, progressive. That they're very progressive in looking at these things. So as they were about to bring in several servers and some high density stuff, they sat down and said, hey, can we work out a rebate program? They're in San Francisco, as you can imagine. That's one of the higher power costs per kilowatt hour. So progressive company, a growing company, and a company in an area where PG&E is strong as far as utility rebates, and the cost of electricity is up there. So in that program, the very first thing that has to be done is you don't start with the containment or blanking panels or cutouts. The very first thing to do is you meet with PG&E or your local utility company, because we've already talked about they might have a little bit different bend on the company. Invite them in, and we're also going to talk a little bit, if you would like, there are consulting companies throughout the United States that are also specialists at this. So what I would suggest is you get that company, if that's what you intend to do. If you feel like you've got the ability to handle it as a manager, I do it individually. Meet with your local company and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. That pre-meeting saves so much headache. So pre-meeting is first. Then you have an audit. And typically the audits are simple things. What are your temperature set points? If your temperature set points are all at the very lowest setting, that means the energy rebate is going to be the highest, right? If you've already been doing certain airflow management and you've creeped them up a few degrees, it may not be as high. My experience is, with companies that still have done a lot of airflow management, that your settings are still at the lowest. So if I was going to do any kind of walkthrough, find out what my set points are, even before I meet with that utility company. What is my set points in temperature and relative humidity? Those numbers will really kind of give you a feel about what you're going to be able to get in a utility rebate. Then you have a baseline audit. So the audit is two things. One is be able to understand how air is being moved in the data center. And that other part of the audit is for them, that is the utility companies, to go ahead and put the What is the equipment called? This equipment basically measures the output of energy that's being used by the data center, and they try to isolate it on the cooling branch. Some data centers, it's a pure play. Like the one I was telling you about, that orange company, the entire power for the data center is just for the data center. It's not sharing power for offices and such. But you want to be able to get and isolate how much energy is being used by your cooling system. Next, logically, you do your airflow management installation. Now, that then should have instant results. That's the beauty about airflow management. So suddenly, temperatures change. My experience has been nationally, and well over 2,000 installations, that the typical temperature drop in the supply side is 10 degrees. So you look at the 10 degrees almost like that's my bogey, that's what I can use, it's my bank account, if you will. Now the issue is how do I then start to make adjustments in my set points without endangering the environment of the data center? And that's where it gets tricky, and that's where using environmental monitoring before and after is very helpful. So in addition of looking just at the power, now we're looking at environmental monitoring weeks, months before the installation, so that we have an idea of what changes take place, maybe through virtualization, or your data center might have various uses of power at certain times. So you're able to see exactly how the environmentals are working in your data center. You then have your airflow management added. Then you have the post piece, of what is the temperature in there. And then with the environmental sensors, you're able to now make adjustments in set points, ensuring that you're still in a safe operating range. And then that eventually gets to a point where you call a post number and say, we're comfortable with the set points at this point. Is that 4 degrees, 6 degrees, 8 degrees, 10 degrees, whatever those changes are. And then you have the utility company come back and do a post reading. And then I should have made in really big letters, that's when you would get the payment from the utility company. So remember that it's all about those three things. You've got to know what your set point is in temperature, set point in relative humidity, and the volume of air. If you've got crack units, as an example, or cray units that are just non-variable speed fan, that's pretty easy to figure out how much volume is being used. And by the way, typically, if that is a set point as far as volume, that's easy to do mathematically, figure out how much less air you need in the room. So very often we see crack units being turned off, not really from the ability of cooling capacity, but from just excess volume that's not needed in the data center. So here is an example of some of the forms that rebate companies have. They basically show the baseline, they show what was accomplished, and then they show what they're willing to rebate them for their cooling airflow management. So if you look at this, I see, that's the total cost. The $378,000 was all of the things that they added. That also, of course, included a lot of new equipment they brought in. There's the rebate number, the annual savings number, and really what that percentage of rebate is based on the airflow management savings was 13%. So we feel that one of the easiest ways to get that environmental data is through wireless sensors. They're very easy to deploy. They can also put that information safely on a cloud that can be accessed by those that you want to have access. So for instance, utility companies could have access to that. Certainly the IT people are going to want to have access to that, as well as the facilities people, because it's a big deal changing set points. That's why we're really in the situation we're in, is because people are just so afraid to change a set point. So having an environmental system means we're going to track it, and we're going to be able to see exactly the effect of 1 degree is. And so I've seen it where it takes weeks. They change a set point, they might wait a week and just see what the data looks like. Take another set point. Now, there are other even more robust systems that are really pretty awesome. They're somewhat expensive, but there's some very good robust systems that can actually do this on the fly. Will actually change the temperature set points and the relative humidity set points literally based on what they're reading at the IT intake and also volume. So anything that you're able to use that is within either the overall goal would be either saving money, it could be a wireless inexpensive system, or it could be a terribly robust system that you're planning on using in the future. Either way, you've got to have a way to monitor this before you can make those changes. And I think I've kind of addressed all of those issues. I think, yeah, we did 3 months before and 3 months after. And I think that was predicated by PG&E, as I recall. So that, again, comes back to the value of having the pre-meeting, because you meet with PG&E and say, we need 3 months of data. Other companies might not be as, requiring so much. So we got a baseline that took place. That's an example graphic of looking at the IT intake, whether it's temperature, relative humidity, or the pressure in the area. And that was monitored through a baseline, monitored through the installation. And by the way, in a typical containment installation, you require far fewer sensors. That's because when you, as an example, in a cold aisle containment, there's typically only a 1 degree difference between the bottom of the cabinet, the top of the cabinet, and one aisle end to the other aisle end. So having, if you will, at every third cabinet, a top, middle, and bottom sensor is not typically required. So you can do far fewer sensors in a containment, airflow containment. And then you should be able to track it over a period of time, and you basically are watching the thermal load move in the data center, and you want to make certain that whatever changes you make are for the highest number. So if we have a thermal load that hit at 2 a.m., they're dumping something in China or something, we want to make sure that our set points can cover whatever thermal load is created by that activity. And so we can see here the temperature changes that took place, the relative humidity changes that took place, and the ability to actually add racks, because the company policy prior to this airflow management was that the top U's were not fully populated. That's another value of airflow management, is the ability to fully populate the rack. So there's your after numbers and the changes as far as the thermal load is to usable space. Increase temperature set points, decrease humidity set points, and did you guys ever put variable speed fans in your crack units? No, they didn't do that yet. And again, what's interesting, with the rebate you guys could even go back later on if you chose to and add variable speed fans. That's the third piece of things that you can change so as to save energy, and even go back for additional rebate. I like the fact that you can elongate the life of a data center by taking cooling energy and using that cooling energy toward server population, increase the population of servers in the room, elongate the life of the data center without any more power being used. So in order to get a rebate, you have to start dealing with a utility company. If you can do that directly, fantastic. If you don't feel comfortable, there's consulting companies that can happen or work with you. The application is made in advance. Then there is monitoring taking place from an environmental point of view and also the consumption of power. Then the airflow management system is installed, monitor the environment as set points are being changed, and then do a pre and post number of the amount of energy that was used before the airflow management and the after, and that ends up with a rebate. So what I'd like for people to understand from this talk is utility companies absolutely want to give you the money, that there are consulting companies that would like to help in this process, but you have to understand airflow management in advance, or else you're not really understanding what it is you have to change. So you can't just change, remember the sunscreen illustration, you can't just change a certain part of it. You got to look at the data center as an entire piece. And once you're able to have what I would call the weakest link eliminated, then you're able to make changes in set points, changes in volume of air, and then that is where the beef is, or that where is the difference in money between your current use of cooling energy and post.